Okay, let's turn to the potential competition doctrine and how it factors into merger analysis. Why do you think that the potential competition doctrine has kind of fallen out of favor, or what role do you think it should play?
Well, potential competition doctrine has fallen out of favor because the government couldn't win any potential competition cases. I mean, the courts were very skeptical of the cases that the government was bringing. And after losing on a regular basis, the agencies have backed off of trying cases under the potential competition doctrine and have come up with new angles to go after essentially the same thing.
For our viewers, let's start by actually explain your understanding of what the potential competition doctrine is.
So the potential competition doctrine is about focusing on a loss of competition that has not yet happened, but might happen in the future. Right? So typical horizontal merger analysis, you have two firms merging who are competitors. There's historical competition between them. We can observe that, and we can make some inferences about what's going to happen in the future once that's gone. Okay? That's a little bit speculative. We all know that's a little bit speculative. The Supreme Court has told us it's okay to be a little bit speculative about this. But potential competition takes it out to another level. It says, we haven't observed competition between these firms yet. We think for some reason that there's going to be competition between them in the future, and we're afraid that whatever the future looks like will be worse off because it won't happen. We've got double speculation, if you will. And that's why the courts raised the bar on the government. They said, if you're going to ask us to shine our crystal ball that well, that we can see all of those future events and call them correctly, we're going to put a lot of fairly serious restrictions on you for the cases that we're willing to do that in. And that's why the government lost a bunch of cases, because the court set the bar pretty high and they couldn't get over it.
And at what point should the potential competition doctrine kick in? I mean, sometimes I think it might be tricky to figure out what is the difference between actual competition and potential competition. For instance, if there's a product that's being developed in R&D, would that count as potential competition, or would that count as actual competition?
Yeah, I think we can do away with the distinction, and I think we did in the 92 guidelines. So we introduced the concept of uncommitted entry in the 92 guidelines as a contrast to committed entry. An uncommitted entrant is somebody who is a potential entrant. They're not there yet, but they are close enough to be counted as a market participant. So where I think we need to go with this is there needs to be a little bit of symmetry. Okay, we should recognize potential competition as a defense. The prospect of new firms getting into the market is something that has long been recognized by the Supreme Court as an appropriate area of inquiry and merger analysis. Government's got very skeptical about that. They really don't want to hear stories about dynamic response anymore, but they want to tell stories about how things that haven't happened yet might happen in the future, and they want to protect those things from happening. If we could get some symmetry here, I think we should recognize potential competition both through a serious analysis of uncommitted entrants and committed entrants. And if we've got a merging firm that's not currently competing but does qualify as an uncommitted entrant, we should treat that like a horizontal merger. Right? But at the same token, if there are other firms outside of the market who are uncommitted entrants, we should count them as well.
So I'm trying to understand the difference between an uncommitted entrant, like where the line is drawn with an uncommitted entrant and a committed entrant. So, for example, in the Google AdMob merger, the agencies looked at the fact that Apple was going to enter the market for mobile advertising, and so they let Google acquire AdMob. That's a committed entrant, so that's not the same thing as a potential doctrine?
I think, I don't know what the agencies would say. I think they were treating Apple essentially as an uncommitted entrant, because the line that the guidelines draw is essentially how much do you need to do to get in? And if you don't need to expend significant sunk costs to get in the market, then we're going to call you an uncommitted entrant, and we're going to treat you as though you were already in. And I think that's what they did with Apple there. They said, look, Apple is just about there.
Right.
They haven't quite entered yet, but they have so little left to do that's not very costly. And clearly they had strong evidence that Apple was committed to entering. Right? And so there you count Apple like a current market participant, and you say, we're not going to have the loss of competition from Google acquiring AdMob because there's this competitor called Apple, which we reasonably project is going to have a significant share in this business.
So is that or is that not an example of the potential competition doctrine being used successfully as a defense?
I wouldn't call it the potential competition doctrine because I think that
right,
doctrine
right.
is dead. But I would say it is an example of using potential competition as a defense. And flip it around, if it was Google buying Apple's business that was not yet in the market, I think that could have been challenged under the same theory Apple was used as a defense for.
But overall, you're saying like the balance is not correct right now for how potential competition is used?
Right now, there's a significant asymmetry. Right? The government is very worried, and they're appropriate to worry about future competition. But they are unwilling to recognize it as a defense as often as they should. I think if we could solve that asymmetry problem, we would have better enforcement policy.
So the Google ad mob decision is kind of an outlier then over the general trend?
Yeah, I mean, if you read the changes in the 2010 guidelines versus 92, if you read the commentary on the merger guidelines that was put out in 2006, you see a significant skepticism about the idea that dynamic response, be it committed or uncommitted entry, could ever be recognized. I mean, there's almost hostility to it. I mean, it's surprising. I know from a litigation perspective, you don't want to open the door to these things, but guidelines are supposed to be a little bit more objective than that.
So when you were drafting the 1992 guidelines, was potential competition a big part of those that version of the guidelines? Well,
they were in the sense that we, for the first time, had this concept of uncommitted entrance that we formalized in 92. It built on concepts that were in the 84 guidelines, but there was an entire section on potential competition mergers in the 84 guidelines that we didn't even bother to update. Instead, we refined these concepts of committed and uncommitted entry, and I think that's the better way to look at it.